Welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time, we're really going deep into this wild world of the PTA,
Oh, yeah.
using these personal diary entries from a PTA chairperson.
Oh, wow.
It's really fascinating. It's like a behind-the-scenes look at,
Yeah.
all the drama and politics of
Really?
trying to run a school and please all these different parents.
It's leadership at a really, micro level. But you can see how these things,
Yeah.
have a ripple effect outwards into the larger community.
Totally. And our main character here is Natalie. She's a stay-at-home mom, and she kind of joins the PTA at first, it sounds like, to find something, to give her more purpose beyond, being a mom at home.
Yeah, her husband, Darren, actually encouraged her to find something outside the home,
Oh, interesting.
which makes you wonder, if maybe she's also looking for validation
Right.
outside of just being a wife and mom.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And let's not forget, Natalie is navigating all of this as a Trinidadian woman.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how her cultural background might influence her perceptions and actions.
That's a crucial point. Her identity as an immigrant, as a woman of color, likely adds another layer of complexity to her experience.
Yeah.
We'll definitely want to keep that in mind as we unpack her story.
Yeah.
It's like a whole other layer to why she would take on this role, which from the sounds of these diary entries is like a lot.
Yeah, she starts out, so excited.
Yeah.
And then really quickly, it's clear she's just overwhelmed with all the demands and expectations.
Yeah, it shows you, even when it's a volunteer position, there's all this like hidden emotional labor involved in it.
Cool.
And then on top of all that, she's got these two different groups of parents she's trying to manage.
Oh, yes, like classic clashing viewpoints.
Right.
You've got Shelley and her group.
Right.
They're like the super progressive ones, really into inclusivity and social justice. Shelley especially seems to think that the school isn't doing enough in those areas.
Really?
Yeah, she's even got this whole thing going on with another PTA chair,
Oh, gosh.
Dalton. Well, there are even accusations of anti-Semitism.
That's a serious allegation.
Yeah.
And raises concerns about prejudice potentially operating even within groups that advocate for inclusivity. It's a reminder that bias can exist anywhere, even in spaces that are ostensibly committed to social justice. It's also a testament to the complexity of human interactions. We can hold progressive values and still harbor prejudices consciously or unconsciously.
It's a lot.
Already? And then you've got like the total opposite viewpoint with Brenda and her group.
Yeah, Brenda's group is much more traditional.
Okay.
Very conservative values.
Mhm.
They really want to protect their kids from anything they see as a threat
Oh, I see.
to their, way of life.
Interesting. It sounds like there are even some accusations of racism directed at Brenda from other parents.
Yeah, that's where things get really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
The diary entries describe how she's suspicious of Latino students.
Wow.
She even mentions that Brenda was initially suspicious of her, possibly because of her ethnicity.
Oh, wow.
But that changed when she learned Natalie was from Trinidad.
That initial suspicion, regardless of its root, speaks to the power of assumptions
Yeah.
and how quickly we can form judgments about people based on very little information. It also highlights how those assumptions can be challenged and changed through genuine interaction and understanding.
Absolutely.
It's pretty jarring when you think about it.
Yeah.
This is a woman who's married to a black man and has biracial kids.
It really makes you think about how people can hold these beliefs
Yay.
that seem to contradict their own lives.
Absolutely. And poor Natalie is stuck right in the middle of this.
Yeah, even though that initial barrier seems to have been broken down, there's still an underlying tension between Natalie and Brenda's group,
Okay.
especially when it comes to Kindy's Caribbean Club.
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The Caribbean Club represents a part of Natalie's identity that she's passing down to her son. It's a way for him to connect with his heritage, but it also potentially exposes him to prejudice or misunderstanding in a community that might not be very familiar with Caribbean culture.
Right. And from Natalie's diary entries, it seems like Brenda's group has expressed some concerns about the club, although the specifics are a little vague.
It's hard to know for sure what's driving those concerns without more information.
Yeah.
But it's worth considering how cultural differences combined with existing political ideologies can sometimes create misunderstandings or even fear.
So we have Natalie, a Trinidadian woman, trying to navigate this complex web of relationships and conflicting viewpoints within the PTA,
Right.
all while trying to protect and support her son's cultural identity.
It's a lot to juggle.
She even mentions in her diary how she kind of envies those groups,
Really?
how close they are and how they all seem to be on the same page.
Right.
It's like she joined the PTA hoping to find that same sense of connection.
And instead, she finds herself trying to bridge this huge gap between two groups who are like total opposites.
It's like a microcosm of what's happening in society as a whole right now.
Totally. And from the sounds of it, things are about to get even more intense.
Oh, yeah. The diary entries suggest that Brenda's group is so unhappy, they're actually thinking about breaking away and forming their own separate conservative PTA.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it goes even further than that. They're taking these actions that are really alarming to the other parents, like talking about banning the queer after-school program.
Seriously?
Yeah. And there's even this unsettling mention of book burning.
You've got to be kidding me. This is like straight out of a dystopian novel.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
It just shows how these ideological battles can play out.
Yeah.
Even in a seemingly harmless setting like a school PTA.
And you can feel Natalie's anxiety kind of rising in these diary entries as she sees this conflict escalating.
Exactly. And what makes Natalie's story so interesting is that she's not looking to pick sides.
Right.
She genuinely sees the good in both groups.
Okay.
The stakes are high for her.
Totally.
She's not just trying to keep the PTA from falling apart,
right,
but she's also dealing with her own need to feel accepted in this community.
Not only is the future of the PTA hanging in the balance, but so is Kenji's sense of belonging and the broader message being sent about inclusivity and diversity within the school community.
So where does that leave Natalie?
She's basically taken on this impossible task of trying to bridge this ideological divide, and it's clearly taking a toll on her.
It's a classic example of someone stepping into a role with a certain set of expectations.
Yeah.
And then realizing the reality is way more complicated and emotionally draining.
And I think that's what makes these diary entries so fascinating. You really get to experience this whole journey through Natalie's eyes.
Absolutely.
So let's see what happens next as we dive deeper into these entries and follow Natalie's journey through this PTA minefield.
Sounds good.
It's like things just keep getting worse for Natalie.
Yeah, as this conflict escalates, you can really see her struggling in the diary entries.
Yeah, she sounds super stressed out.
Lots of self-doubt. And it sounds like she's feeling pretty isolated.
And as we discussed earlier, her own identity as a Trinidadian woman adds another layer of complexity.
Right, and that brings us back to Kenji's Caribbean Club. Natalie mentions that Brenda's group had some choice words about it, which makes me wonder if their concerns are rooted in genuine cultural misunderstandings or something more problematic.
It's hard to say for sure based on the limited information we have, but it's worth exploring how cultural differences can sometimes intersect with political ideologies in ways that create friction.
For example, Brenda's group might see the Caribbean Club as promoting a cultural perspective that clashes with their own values, especially if they have limited exposure to Caribbean traditions.
Exactly. And this ties into the broader societal debate about assimilation versus multiculturalism. Should immigrants be expected to conform to the dominant culture?
Right.
Or is there space for multiple cultural expressions to coexist?
Those are big questions, and they're playing out right here in Natalie's PTA drama.
Yeah.
It's like her son's Caribbean Club has become a lightning rod for all these anxieties about cultural change and the preservation of tradition.
And Natalie, as a mother and an immigrant, is caught in the crossfire. She's trying to create a space for her son to embrace his heritage, but she's also facing pushback from a group that might see that heritage as a threat to their own sense of belonging.
It's heartbreaking, really, and it makes me wonder, how do we as a society create spaces where everyone feels welcome and valued?
Yeah.
Where different cultural expressions are seen as enriching rather than threatening?
That's the ideal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it requires a conscious effort to move beyond fear and prejudice, to embrace difference and engage in meaningful dialogue.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit.
Right. And there's this other parent, Tinsley, who's clearly fed up with the whole situation.
Yeah.
And she suggests something pretty extreme.
Okay.
Involving the school board and like trying to get Brenda's group's kids expelled.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah. It's like, come on, Tinsley, that's a little much.
I mean, you can understand her frustration.
Yeah.
But that kind of approach could really backfire.
Totally. Instead of like addressing the actual issues, it just creates a whole bunch of new problems.
Absolutely. And it really shows how important it is to think about the long-term impacts of your actions.
Right.
Especially in a community setting.
Like, it's not just about winning the argument or getting your way.
Yeah.
You have to think about how your actions are going to affect everyone.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's like Tinsley's just adding fuel to the fire.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And of course, poor Natalie is caught right in the middle of it.
Yeah, like trying to put out this raging inferno.
Right. And her diary entries really convey that sense of helplessness.
Yeah.
Like she could see this train wreck about to happen, but she has no idea how to stop it.
It must be so stressful trying to keep the peace, appease all these different parents. And on top of that, she's still figuring out her own leadership style.
That's got to be tough,
Yeah.
especially when you're in a volunteer position like this.
Right. You don't have a lot of authority.
Yeah, you're trying to manage all these different expectations.
Right. And make decisions that affect a ton of people.
And as a way to support her son Kenji and his connection to his Trinidadian heritage through his Caribbean club.
Right.
But this conflict between the liberal and conservative parent groups is threatening to tear the whole thing apart.
And in this case, those decisions have some pretty serious ethical implications, too.
Absolutely.
Like the idea of expelling kids just because their parents have controversial views.
Yeah, that's crossing a line.
It's like, who are we to decide who gets to be part of the community?
It sets a dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
And it goes against everything a school should be about.
Totally. Like inclusivity and welcoming everyone.
Exactly.
It's about her wanting to create a space where her son, and by extension, a part of her own identity, is accepted and celebrated.
Right. And it's not just about acceptance.
Yeah.
It's about Kenji having the opportunity to share his culture with his classmates, to broaden their understanding of the world beyond their immediate community.
Right.
But it seems like some parents might see that as disruptive or even threatening.
That's where the concept of cultural capital comes into play.
Okay.
Each group, in a sense, possesses a certain set of cultural knowledge, values, and practices that they deem important. And when those cultural capitals clash, it can lead to misunderstanding, fear, and even a sense of competition.
So in this case, the Caribbean Club represents a form of cultural capital that's unfamiliar to some members of the PTA.
Right.
And that unfamiliarity can breed suspicion or resistance, especially if it's perceived as challenging the existing social norms.
Exactly. It's like introducing a new element into a delicate ecosystem.
Yeah.
There's bound to be some disruption as the system tries to adapt. The introduction of Kenji's club could be seen as a significant shift in the cultural landscape.
And that shift can be unsettling for some people.
Right.
Leading them to question whether their own cultural values are being marginalized or replaced.
That's why it's so crucial to approach these situations with sensitivity and a willingness to engage in dialogue.
Yeah.
If we can foster an environment where different cultural perspectives are seen as valuable and enriching rather than threatening, we can create a more inclusive and vibrant community for everyone.
But how do we actually do that?
Right.
How do we bridge those cultural divides and create that sense of shared understanding?
It starts with recognizing that cultural differences are not a zero-sum game.
Okay.
Embracing one culture doesn't have to come at the expense of another.
Right.
It's about finding ways to celebrate our diversity while also identifying those common human experiences that connect us all.
And it's ironic because Natalie herself seems to really crave that sense of community.
Yeah, she joined the PTA hoping to find that connection.
Right.
And now it's like she's more isolated than ever.
It's almost like her search for belonging led her to this place of total division.
Wow, that's deep.
And these diary entries really make you think about how we deal with these kinds of situations.
Yeah.
Like, how do we handle differences of opinion, especially when they feel so personal?
That's a question we all face.
Yeah.
Whether it's in our families or at work or in our social circles.
It's tough.
Yeah. But I think it starts with being willing to listen to each other.
Absolutely.
Even when we disagree.
Right. The goal shouldn't be to silence people.
Yeah.
But to understand where they're coming from.
And maybe find some common ground.
Even if we don't agree on everything.
Yeah. It's about finding that balance between standing up for what you believe in and recognizing that people who see things differently are still human beings.
And that's not always easy.
Especially when emotions are running high.
It's a lot of effort.
But I think it's worth it.
Definitely.
Because in the end, we all want the same thing.
Yeah.
To be part of a community that feels safe and welcoming.
Absolutely.
So the big question is, can Natalie figure out a way to make that happen?
Right. Can she somehow bring these parents together?
Yeah.
Or is this conflict going to tear the whole community apart?
We'll have to wait and see as we head into the final part of our deep dive. So we left off with Natalie really struggling. Like she doesn't know what to do next.
Yeah, it's interesting because the diary entries don't actually give us a clear ending.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is kind of the point. It's like Natalie's story is a reflection of what we're all going through.
Yeah.
Trying to navigate this world where everyone's so divided.
And it's not just happening in schools, right?
Oh, definitely not.
It's like everywhere you look.
It's on social media, in politics.
Even in our own families.
Exactly.
So it's easy to feel kind of hopeless, like,
Yeah.
is there any way to bridge these divides?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, but even though Natalie's story doesn't have like a neat and tidy resolution,
Right.
I think there are still some really important lessons we can take away from it.
I agree.
Like, for me, one of the biggest things is the importance of empathy. Even though Natalie's caught in the middle of all this drama,
Yeah.
she really tries to understand where both sides are coming from, even when she doesn't agree with them.
That's so important.
And it's not about saying, oh, everything's okay, or like
Right.
excusing bad behavior.
It's about recognizing that we're all human.
Exactly.
And we all have our own reasons for believing what we believe.
And that can be hard.
Oh, definitely. Especially when we're talking about issues that are really emotionally charged.
It's like our gut reaction is to just shut down
Right.
or get defensive.
And that just makes things worse.
Yeah. But if we can take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and really try to listen to each other,
Yeah,
I think that's where the possibility of understanding starts.
absolutely.
It's not about winning the argument.
Right.
It's about finding a way to coexist.
Even if we disagree.
And, that might mean
Yeah.
that nobody gets exactly what they want.
True.
But maybe we can find a solution that
Yeah.
works for everyone.
A compromise.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of work
It does.
and patience and understanding.
But it's worth it.
It is, because ultimately what we all want is to feel like we belong,
Right.
to be part of a community that values and respects us,
Absolutely.
even when we have different opinions.
And that's the challenge we all face.
Yeah.
Not just in our schools.
But in our communities and in society as a whole,
It's a big one.
it is. But I think if we can learn from Natalie's story
Yeah.
and remember the importance of empathy and dialogue, then maybe, just maybe, we can start to bridge those divides.
I hope so.
Me too. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive